Welcome back to the Sleepy Mind channel. Tonight we will spend some time with you, Leo. We will move through your qualities in the same steady way that patterns move through the night sky. If you find these zodiac sleep stories useful, you are welcome to like the video and subscribe for more. You can also explore our other videos, each created to help you fall asleep in a calm and unhurried way. If you choose to leave a comment about where you are listening from, it is always interesting to see how far these stories travel. Many listeners find it grounding to notice this quiet sense of connection. Now we begin with you, Leo. This time is simply for you. You are often described as confident, expressive, or larger than life, usually by people who only notice you when you are already shining. What they miss is how intentional that visibility is. You do not want attention for its own sake. You want recognition that feels earned, personal, and real. You tend to experience the world through expression. You speak, create, lead, or perform, not because you need noise, but because being fully yourself feels natural. When you hold that back for too long, something in you dims. Expression, for you, is not excess, it is oxygen. You might recognize that you feel most alive when you are bringing warmth into a space, lifting the mood, encouraging others, setting a tone that feels generous rather than guarded. This does not come from ego. It comes from a genuine desire to share what you have. You are not unaware of how visible you can be. You know when eyes are on you. You feel the weight of expectation that can come with that. Sometimes you enjoy it. Sometimes it feels heavy. Being seen is not always the same as being understood, and you know the difference well. You may notice that you are deeply affected by appreciation, not shallow praise, but recognition that feels specific and sincere. When someone notices your effort, your heart opens. When it is overlooked, something in you closes quietly, even if you keep smiling. You often express care through generosity, time, attention, encouragement, presence. You give easily when you feel valued. When you do not, you begin to protect your energy, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. You might recognize that you have a strong relationship with pride, not arrogance, but dignity. You want to stand tall in who you are. When that dignity is respected, you are warm and magnanimous. When it is challenged or dismissed, you feel it deeply. You are not someone who enjoys being reduced, labels that flatten you, jokes that miss your depth. Being treated as a role rather than a person unsettles you. You want to be seen in full, not just applauded from a distance. You may notice that you often take responsibility for morale. When energy drops, you lift it. When confidence wavers, you reinforce it. This leadership is instinctive. Over time, it can become tiring if it is not shared. You are not afraid of effort. You are afraid of invisibility. Not being acknowledged can feel more painful than being criticized. At least criticism recognizes your presence. You might recognize that you sometimes struggle when your generosity is assumed rather than appreciated. Giving feels joyful when it is received with gratitude. When it is taken for granted, something in you withdraws. You are not driven by approval alone. You are driven by connection through expression. You want to give what you have and feel that it matters. You continue, guided by warmth, creativity, and a strong sense of self, learning where to shine freely and where to protect your light, trusting that when your expression is met with genuine recognition, it becomes a source of confidence rather than pressure. You may have noticed that you often feel responsible for setting the emotional temperature of a room. When things feel flat or heavy, you instinctively bring warmth. A joke, a story, a bit of enthusiasm that lifts the energy just enough to make things feel alive again. You do this without planning it. It is simply how you respond. You tend to experience confidence as something relational rather than fixed. When you feel appreciated, your confidence flows easily. When you feel ignored or dismissed, it wavers. This does not mean your confidence is shallow. It means it is responsive to connection, not built in isolation. You might recognize that you have a strong need to feel proud of yourself, not in comparison to others, but in relation to your own standards. When you act in ways that align with your values, you stand taller. When you compromise too much, something inside you shrinks, even if no one else notices. You are rarely indifferent to how your efforts land. You want to know that what you give makes a difference. Silence after effort can feel confusing, even painful. You may keep going outwardly, but inwardly you begin to question where your energy belongs. You may notice that you are deeply affected by loyalty. When someone stands by you, supports you openly, or believes in you without needing proof, it strengthens you profoundly. Betrayal or quiet disloyalty, on the other hand, can wound you in ways you do not easily forget. You often express vulnerability through pride rather than confession. You show your strength. You share your work. You stand visible. Letting others see you fail or doubt yourself feels riskier than letting them see you succeed. You might recognize that you struggle when people assume your confidence means you do not need care. You do. You just do not always ask for it directly. Being checked in on, without being diminished, matters more to you than you admit. You are not someone who enjoys hiding. Shrinking yourself to fit a space feels unnatural. At the same time, you are learning when visibility serves you and when it costs you more than it gives. This discernment is new and still forming. You may notice that you feel most secure when appreciation feels mutual, when you are not the only one giving encouragement, when praise flows both ways. Reciprocity steadies you. One-sided admiration does not. You are often more sensitive than people realize, especially to subtle shifts in respect. A joke that crosses a line, a comment that dismisses your effort. These moments register quickly. You may laugh them off, but they leave an imprint. You might recognize that you sometimes take on more responsibility than you should because you believe you can handle it. You step forward when others hesitate. Over time, this can leave you carrying more weight than is fair, especially if your leadership is expected rather than appreciated. You are not driven by ego. You are driven by a desire to matter, to contribute something meaningful, to leave a trace of warmth behind you when you move on. You continue, learning how to shine without burning out, how to lead without carrying everything alone, and how to trust that when your light is met with respect rather than demand, it becomes a source of strength rather than strain. You may have noticed that you feel most at ease when your presence is welcomed rather than managed. Being invited to contribute feels different from being expected to perform. When the invitation is genuine, you relax. When it turns into obligation, your enthusiasm thins, even if you keep showing up. You often carry a quiet awareness of when admiration slips into expectation. Praise that once felt warm becomes something you are meant to live up to. You feel the shift immediately. The space where you once expressed freely starts to feel narrower, and you begin to protect your energy rather than offer it openly. You might recognize that you have a strong internal compass for dignity. You want to act in ways you can respect later, When you compromise that for approval, it lingers. When you stand by yourself, even quietly, it steadies you in a way that no applause ever could. You are rarely comfortable with being celebrated without being known. Compliments that miss the effort behind your work feel hollow. What you want is recognition that sees the labor, the risk, and the intention, not just the result. You may notice that you often give encouragement more easily than you receive it. You lift others up instinctively. You notice their strengths. You speak confidence into them. Allowing others to do the same for you can feel strangely vulnerable, as though your footing depends on their response. You are not afraid of responsibility, but you are learning that leadership does not require constant visibility. Some moments ask you to step forward, others ask you to let the light shift elsewhere. This does not diminish you, it preserves you. You might recognize that you feel most grounded when you can express yourself without having to defend that expression. When creativity is met with curiosity rather than critique. When your ideas are received as offerings rather than auditions, you are often more affected by subtle disrespect than by open disagreement. Being dismissed lightly can hurt more than being challenged seriously. You would rather be engaged with honestly than brushed aside politely. You may notice that you sometimes hesitate to share uncertainty because you are used to being seen as capable. Admitting doubt feels like risking the image others hold of you. You are learning that vulnerability, when chosen, can deepen respect rather than diminish it. You are not someone who needs constant validation, but you do need acknowledgement that feels human. Being seen as a symbol or a role leaves you lonely. Being seen as a person restores you. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to protect your heart when appreciation feels conditional. When warmth depends on you staying bright, you dim intentionally, conserving what is real beneath the shine. You are learning to distinguish between spaces where your light is celebrated and spaces where it is consumed. This distinction is subtle, but once you feel it, you do not forget it. You continue, guided by creativity, pride, and a deep need for genuine connection, learning how to express yourself freely while choosing environments that honor your warmth rather than exploit it. You may have noticed that you often feel a quiet tension between wanting to be generous and wanting to protect yourself. Giving comes easily to you. Pulling back does not. When you sense that your warmth is being taken for granted, the decision to step away can feel heavier than continuing to give, even when you are tired. You tend to show love through enthusiasm, through showing up fully, through being present in a way that fills the room. When that enthusiasm is met with appreciation, it multiplies. When it is met with indifference, it drains you more quickly than you expect. You might recognize that you have a strong desire to feel chosen, not just admired. Being admired can feel distant. Being chosen feels personal. You want to know that people stay because they value who you are, not because of what you provide. You are rarely comfortable with relationships where your role is fixed. Being seen only as the leader, the entertainer, or the strong one feels limiting. You want room to be unsure, to rest, to be ordinary without losing respect. You may notice that you feel most confident when you can move between visibility and privacy freely, when you can step forward and step back without explanation, when your worth is not tied to constant performance. You often carry a deep sense of loyalty once trust is established. You stand up for people. You defend them publicly. You celebrate them openly. When that loyalty is returned, it strengthens you. When it is not, the disappointment cuts quietly but deeply. You might recognize that you are sensitive to being overshadowed or overlooked, even when you pretend not to care. Being invisible can feel worse than being criticized. At least criticism acknowledges your presence. You are not someone who enjoys shrinking yourself to avoid discomfort. At the same time, you are learning that choosing not to shine in certain spaces is not the same as dimming yourself. It is discernment. You may notice that you are most at ease when appreciation feels mutual rather than hierarchical. You do not want to be placed above others. You want to stand alongside them, respected and connected. You often feel a strong pull toward creative expression, even when life feels heavy. Creativity restores you. It gives your feelings somewhere to go. Without it, your energy can feel trapped. You might recognize that you struggle when your generosity is treated as obligation, when giving is expected rather than welcomed. This is where resentment can begin, even if you keep smiling outwardly. You are learning that your light does not need to be constant to be powerful. It can pulse. It can rest. It can return when it is truly invited. You continue, guided by warmth, pride, and a desire to be fully seen, learning how to give from abundance rather than depletion, trusting that when your expression is met with sincerity, it becomes a source of joy rather than strain. You may have noticed that you often feel most yourself when you are allowed to create without judgment, when ideas can be explored before they are evaluated, when expression is met with curiosity rather than immediate critique. These conditions let your confidence breathe rather than brace. You tend to sense quickly when a space is safe for your creativity. Encouragement feels light. Attention feels warm. In those places, you expand naturally. In spaces where comparison or competition dominates, you become more guarded, conserving your energy until it can be used meaningfully again. You might recognize that you have a strong relationship with pride that is tied to integrity. You want to feel good about how you show up, not just about how you are perceived. When your actions align with your values, pride feels grounding. When they do not, no amount of applause settles you. You are rarely indifferent to how your contributions are received. You watch for resonance rather than volume. A single sincere response can mean more to you than widespread but shallow approval. You want to know that what you offered actually reached someone. You may notice that you struggle when people assume your confidence means you do not need reassurance. You do. You simply prefer reassurance that is specific and genuine. Vague praise washes over you. Thoughtful recognition lands. You often experience vulnerability as a choice rather than an accident. You decide when to show it. You decide how much. When vulnerability is offered deliberately, it feels empowering. When it is exposed without consent, it feels destabilizing. You might recognize that you sometimes stay visible longer than is comfortable because you do not want to disappoint. Stepping back can feel like letting people down. Over time, you are learning that rest is not abandonment and that your presence matters more when it is replenished. You are not someone who enjoys blending into the background for too long. Anonymity drains you. You need to feel that your individuality is seen and valued. At the same time, you are learning that being seen does not require constant performance. You may notice that you feel most secure when your expression is met with respect rather than demand. When others receive what you offer without insisting on more. This respect allows your generosity to remain joyful instead of becoming strained. You often show leadership by example, by taking creative risks, by stepping forward first. This courage inspires others, even when you are not trying to lead. You set tone through authenticity rather than authority. You might recognize that you are deeply affected by environments that celebrate success but ignore process. Being praised only for outcomes can feel alienating. You want your effort, persistence, and intention to be seen, not just the final result. You are learning to trust that your light does not disappear when you step back. It remains yours. You can return to visibility when it feels right, without having to prove that you still belong. You continue, guided by creativity, pride, and a desire for genuine connection, learning how to express yourself fully while choosing spaces that honor your warmth, your effort, and your humanity. You may have noticed that your sense of worth strengthens when you feel free to be expressive without comparison. Measuring yourself against others dulls your joy. Creating from your own center restores it. When you are not competing for space, your confidence feels lighter and more natural. You often feel most engaged when your efforts invite participation rather than applause. Shared laughter, collaborative creation, moments where others step into the warmth you generate and add their own. These exchanges nourish you more than standing alone in the spotlight. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to celebrate others when you feel secure yourself. You amplify what you admire. You encourage what you believe in. When your own light is supported, you become generous with praise and recognition. You are rarely comfortable with admiration that feels distant. Being admired from afar can feel isolating. You want connection that feels reciprocal. You want to know who is with you, not just who is watching. You may notice that you sometimes hesitate to show disappointment because you do not want to dampen the mood. You keep things upbeat. You redirect. Over time, you are learning that allowing space for disappointment does not erase warmth. It deepens trust. You often experience fulfillment when you can be proud of how you treated people, not just of what you achieved. Integrity matters to you. When your actions reflect generosity and respect, you feel aligned even if recognition is modest. You might recognize that you feel most settled when your presence is welcomed without conditions, when you are not required to be inspiring, entertaining, or strong to belong. These moments allow you to rest in your own skin. You are not someone who needs constant excitement. You need meaningful expression. When creativity is allowed to unfold at a humane pace, your energy sustains itself without strain. You may notice that you are particularly sensitive to environments that confuse confidence with dominance. You prefer leadership that invites rather than commands, authority that listens rather than asserts. You respond to respect with loyalty. You often bring courage into spaces that feel hesitant. You step forward when others pause. This courage is generous, but it also asks something of you. Learning when to step back so others can rise is part of your ongoing balance. You might recognize that you are learning to separate your identity from your output. What you create matters deeply, but it is not the sum of who you are. Allowing yourself to exist without producing restores you in ways success alone cannot. You continue, guided by warmth and creativity, learning how to stand confidently without needing to dominate, trusting that when your expression is met with respect and reciprocity, it becomes a shared source of joy rather than a solitary effort. You may have noticed that your confidence feels most stable when it is rooted in self-respect rather than reaction. When you like who you are becoming, approval matters less. You still appreciate recognition, but you no longer depend on it to feel grounded. You often feel most relaxed when you can let your guard down without disappearing. When you are not performing, not leading, not holding everything together. Just present, just yourself. These moments are rare, but they restore you deeply. You might recognize that you are learning to tolerate being ordinary at times. Not diminished, just unremarkable. This can feel uncomfortable at first, especially when you are used to standing out. Over time, it becomes freeing. You realize you do not lose your light when you rest it. You are rarely motivated by envy, even when competition surrounds you. What moves you is inspiration. Seeing what is possible. Watching someone else shine does not threaten you when you feel secure. It reminds you of what you value in expression and effort. You may notice that you are especially affected by sincerity, a genuine compliment, a thoughtful response, a moment of honest engagement. These things matter to you more than spectacle. They affirm connection rather than performance. You often show strength through encouragement. You believe in others loudly. You speak confidence into spaces that feel hesitant. This generosity comes naturally to you, but it is strongest when you feel supported yourself. You might recognize that you sometimes struggle to receive care without feeling exposed. Being the one who is seen without control can feel vulnerable. You are learning that letting others support you does not weaken your presence. It steadies it. You are not someone who enjoys shrinking to make others comfortable. At the same time, you are learning that true leadership does not require constant visibility. Sometimes it means creating space for others to step forward. You may notice that you feel most alive when your expression is aligned with your values, when what you share reflects who you are becoming, when creativity feels honest rather than performative. These moments renew your sense of purpose. You are not afraid of being seen. You are careful about where and how you are seen. Respect matters. Context matters. When those are present, you open fully. You often feel a quiet pride in staying true to yourself, even when it would be easier to chase approval. This pride does not shout. It settles. It becomes a steady presence you can rely on. You continue, guided by warmth, creativity, and a growing sense of inner authority, learning how to shine without strain, trusting that your light, when grounded in self-respect, is generous, enduring, and unmistakably your own. You may have noticed that as you grow more comfortable with yourself, you become less reactive to how others respond to you. Praise still feels good. Criticism still registers, but neither defines you in the same way it once did. Your sense of center feels steadier, less dependent on the room you are in. You often feel most confident when you know you are acting from choice rather than obligation. When you step forward because you want to, not because you feel expected to. That difference changes how your energy lands. What once felt heavy becomes lighter. What once felt draining becomes purposeful. You might recognize that you are learning to notice when admiration turns into demand, when being appreciated quietly shifts into being relied upon. Catching that moment earlier allows you to adjust before resentment builds. This awareness protects your generosity rather than limiting it. You are rarely comfortable with spaces that confuse attention with connection. Being seen is not the same as being known. Over time, you have learned to value depth over volume, sincerity over spectacle. This discernment refines where you choose to shine. You may notice that you feel most at ease when your creativity is allowed to evolve without pressure, when you are not rushed to produce or repeat what once worked. Growth, for you, comes from staying honest rather than staying impressive. You often experience fulfillment when your presence encourages others to be more themselves, when your warmth invites openness rather than comparison. These moments remind you why expression matters to you in the first place. You might recognize that you sometimes grieve the versions of yourself that were built around approval, not with regret, but with tenderness. Those versions carried you when you needed them. Now, you are building something steadier beneath the shine. You are not losing your spark. You are grounding it, allowing it to last longer, letting it warm rather than scorch. This shift does not happen all at once. It unfolds as you learn where your energy truly belongs. You may notice that you feel most powerful when your confidence comes from alignment rather than reaction. When you know who you are becoming and act in service of that, attention becomes secondary rather than central. You continue, guided by creativity, dignity, and a deep desire to connect authentically, learning how to offer your light freely without losing yourself in the process, trusting that when your expression is rooted in self-respect, it naturally finds the spaces where it is welcomed and returned. You may have noticed that there is a quieter satisfaction beginning to matter more to you than external response. Not the rush of being noticed, but the calm that comes from knowing you showed up honestly. That feeling lasts longer. It stays with you after the room empties. You often feel most settled when your efforts feel self-directed, when what you create or offer is chosen rather than extracted. Obligation dulls your joy. Choice restores it. This distinction shapes how long you can stay present without strain. You might recognize that you are becoming more attentive to how your body responds to visibility. When being seen feels expansive, when it feels tight. These signals help you decide when to step forward and when to step back, even if you cannot always explain the choice to others. You are rarely interested in dominating a space. What you want is resonance, a sense that what you bring is landing, being felt, and being met. When that happens, you relax into yourself. When it does not, you conserve your energy rather than forcing impact. You may notice that you are more willing now to let others take the spotlight without feeling diminished. Someone else shining no longer threatens you when your own sense of worth feels stable. In those moments, admiration replaces comparison. You often experience pride not as display, but as alignment. When your actions match your values, when your expression feels true rather than strategic. That pride is quiet, but it is durable. You might recognize that you feel most connected when your warmth is returned naturally, without performance on either side. Shared laughter, mutual respect, a sense of ease. These moments matter more to you than applause ever did. You are not abandoning visibility. You are choosing it with more care. You understand now that constant brightness can become exhausting, not just for you, but for those around you. Allowing space creates contrast. Contrast makes your presence more meaningful when you return. You may notice that you feel increasingly protective of your creative energy, not hoarding it, but tending it. You give it where it can grow, rather than where it will be consumed quickly. This care keeps your expression alive rather than depleted. You are learning that leadership does not require carrying everyone with you. Sometimes it means trusting others to step into their own strength while you stand alongside rather than in front. You continue, guided by warmth and a growing sense of inner authority, learning how to shine from a place of choice rather than pressure, trusting that your light, when offered freely, and received with respect is enough just as it is. You may have noticed that as your confidence settles inward, you become less interested in proving anything at all. You still care deeply about what you do, but the need to justify your presence begins to fade. You know when you have shown up fully, and that knowledge feels sufficient. You often feel most at ease when your contribution is invited, rather than assumed. Being welcomed into a space allows your warmth to flow naturally. Being expected to carry the energy can quietly exhaust you, even when you are capable of doing it. You might recognize that you are learning to listen to the early signs of depletion, a subtle dulling of enthusiasm, a hesitation before stepping forward. These signals are not failure, they are information, telling you when it is time to rest your light, rather than push it brighter. You are rarely comfortable with attention that feels transactional, praise offered only when you perform, interest that fades when you pause. These exchanges teach you quickly where your presence is valued for who you are, rather than for what you provide. You may notice that you feel most generous when appreciation is specific, when someone notices not just the outcome, but the effort, the courage, the care that went into it. Being seen this way allows you to give without feeling emptied. You often experience joy when your creativity is shared rather than consumed, when others add to what you offer instead of simply taking it in. Collaboration feels more nourishing than applause because it keeps the exchange alive. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to protect your dignity, especially in moments of vulnerability. You do not easily reveal doubt or fatigue. When you do, it is because you trust the space to hold you without diminishing you. You are not someone who thrives on constant affirmation. What you want is respect that remains steady, even when the spotlight shifts away. Knowing that your worth does not disappear when you are quiet allows you to relax more deeply into yourself. You may notice that you feel increasingly comfortable stepping back without fear of being forgotten. You trust now that your presence leaves an imprint that does not require constant reinforcement. This trust changes how you engage with visibility. You often feel most aligned when your expression feels playful rather than performative, when you create for the joy of it, when you share without measuring response. These moments remind you why expression mattered to you long before anyone was watching. You continue, guided by warmth, creativity, and a steadier sense of self, learning how to offer your light in ways that sustain you, trusting that when your expression comes from authenticity rather than obligation, it naturally finds its place. You may have noticed that when your expression comes from enjoyment rather than effort, it feels lighter for everyone involved. You are still visible, still warm, but there is less strain underneath it. Laughter arrives more easily. Creativity flows without needing to be pushed. This is the version of you that feels most sustainable. You often sense when a space invites you to be fully yourself rather than a version of yourself. The difference is subtle. One feels open and curious. The other feels expectant. You respond very differently to each, even if you never name it out loud. You might recognize that you are becoming more honest with yourself about when you want to be seen and when you simply want to be. Both are valid needs. Neither cancels the other out. Giving yourself permission to move between them helps you stay generous without feeling drained. You are rarely interested in admiration that creates distance. Being placed on a pedestal feels isolating. You prefer connection that feels warm and level. Standing alongside others, sharing space rather than commanding it, restores you more deeply than applause ever could. You may notice that you feel most relaxed when your presence is welcomed but not demanded, when you can contribute without being responsible for everything. This freedom allows your leadership to emerge naturally rather than through pressure. You often experience confidence as something that settles in after you have acted in alignment with yourself. It does not arrive beforehand. It grows quietly as you notice that you are still standing in your own truth, even when the response is mixed. You might recognize that you have become more discerning about where you invest your enthusiasm. You still have plenty of it, but you no longer scatter it widely. You give it where it can be received, returned, and allowed to rest. You are not retreating from the world. You are choosing how you meet it. This choice gives your expression more clarity and your warmth more depth. You may notice that you feel most fulfilled when your creativity is allowed to evolve rather than repeat itself. Being asked to stay the same can feel limiting. Growth, for you, comes from staying honest rather than staying impressive. You often feel strongest when your sense of self is anchored internally rather than reflected back at you. External response still matters, but it no longer decides who you are. This shift brings a calm authority that does not need to announce itself. You continue, guided by a steady warmth and a growing trust in yourself, learning how to shine in ways that feel nourishing, reciprocal, and true. Trusting that your light does not need to compete or perform to be recognized when it is real. You may have noticed that there is a new kind of ease beginning to shape how you move through the world. You still bring warmth. You still carry presence, but you no longer feel the same urgency to make sure it lands perfectly. You trust that what is real does not need constant adjustment. You often feel most settled when your expression is welcomed without conditions, when you are not asked to be inspiring, impressive, or strong in order to belong. These moments remind you that your value is not tied to performance, but to who you are when you are simply present. You might recognize that you are becoming more comfortable letting others misunderstand you briefly. You no longer rush to correct every assumption or defend every choice. Clarity arrives over time, and you are learning that you do not need to chase it. You are rarely interested now in spaces that thrive on comparison. Measuring yourself against others drains the joy from what you do. When creativity turns into competition, your heart closes slightly. You save your energy for places where expression feels shared rather than ranked. You may notice that you feel a deeper satisfaction when you act in alignment with your own values, even if no one notices right away. That quiet integrity stays with you longer than applause ever did. It gives you something solid to stand on when attention fades. You often experience connection as something that grows through mutual presence rather than admiration. Being liked feels fine. Being respected feels better. Being known feels best. These distinctions guide where you invest your time and heart. You might recognize that you are learning to pause before stepping forward, not because you doubt yourself, but because you want to be sure your energy is welcome. This pause does not dim you. It focuses you. You are not someone who stops caring about impact. You simply care more now about whether that impact is nourishing rather than draining. When what you offer strengthens both you and others, you feel aligned. When it costs you too much, you step back without guilt. You may notice that you feel more generous when your light is met with warmth rather than expectation. Reciprocity keeps your heart open. Obligation closes it. This awareness helps you choose where to stay visible and where to rest. You are not losing your fire. You are learning how to tend it, allowing it to glow steadily rather than flare constantly. This steadiness gives your presence depth and your expression longevity. You continue, guided by warmth, creativity, and a growing sense of inner assurance, learning how to shine from a place of choice rather than demand, trusting that when your light is rooted in authenticity, it does not need to prove itself to be seen. You may have noticed that the more you trust yourself, the less you feel pulled to chase affirmation. Appreciation still matters, but it no longer decides your direction. You can feel when something is right without waiting for it to be reflected back at you. You often feel most grounded when your actions feel intentional rather than reactive. When you choose how to show up instead of responding to what is expected. This choice gives your presence a steadiness that others sense, even if they cannot quite name it. You might recognize that you are learning to let your warmth be selective without feeling selfish. Not every space deserves your full light. Not every moment requires your energy. Protecting your enthusiasm allows it to remain genuine when you do offer it. You are rarely comfortable with attention that demands a version of you that feels fixed. Being told to stay the same can feel more limiting than being challenged to grow. You want room to evolve, to surprise yourself as much as others. You may notice that you feel a deeper sense of pride when you act from integrity rather than impulse, when your generosity is chosen, when your leadership is offered rather than assumed. This pride is quieter, but it lasts. You often experience joy when expression becomes playful again, when creativity feels like exploration instead of output. These moments reconnect you to why you loved expressing yourself long before anyone was watching. You might recognize that you are becoming more patient with yourself during times when your light feels lower. You no longer interpret rest as failure. You understand now that brightness returns more easily when it is allowed to fade naturally. You are not withdrawing from connection. You are learning to meet it on terms that honor you. When those terms are met, your warmth remains unmistakable. You may notice that you feel most alive when your presence invites others to be fully themselves as well. When the space you create allows authenticity rather than performance. This is the leadership that feels truest to you. You are not trying to be admired. You are trying to be real. And when you are, the right recognition tends to arrive without being chased. You continue, guided by a steady warmth and an evolving sense of self, learning how to offer your light in ways that are nourishing, reciprocal, and honest, trusting that what is real does not need to compete to be seen. You may have noticed that your confidence feels different now than it once did. It is less about standing out and more about standing comfortably in yourself. You still enjoy being seen, but you no longer feel the same need to prove that you deserve the space you take up. That space feels earned simply by being who you are. You often feel most at ease when your presence is met with ease in return, when people respond naturally rather than with expectation, when there is room to breathe instead of pressure to perform. In those moments, your warmth feels effortless, and you remember why expressing yourself has always felt like a gift rather than a task. You might recognize that you are becoming more discerning about where you invest your energy. You still care deeply, but you notice more quickly when a situation asks too much without giving anything back. Choosing to step away from those spaces no longer feels like failure. It feels like respect for yourself. You are rarely interested now in admiration that stays on the surface. What matters to you is being recognized in your full humanity, your doubts as well as your strengths, your quieter moments as well as your confident ones. When someone sees all of that and stays, you feel genuinely connected. You may notice that you feel calmer when you allow your creativity to move at its own pace, not forcing output, not repeating what once worked, letting expression change shape as you do. This flexibility keeps your fire alive without exhausting it. You often experience fulfillment when your warmth creates safety rather than pressure, when people relax around you instead of performing for you. These moments remind you that leadership can be gentle and that influence does not require control. You might recognize that you are learning to enjoy visibility without clinging to it, to step forward when it feels right and to step back when it does not. This balance gives your presence more weight than constant brightness ever could. You are not afraid of being ordinary at times. You understand now that rest does not erase your brilliance. It preserves it. Allowing yourself to be unremarkable for a while gives your light somewhere to renew itself. You may notice that you feel most aligned when your actions reflect your inner values rather than external demand. When you act from that place, confidence settles naturally, without effort or display. You continue, guided by warmth, creativity, and a steadier sense of self, learning how to shine in ways that feel authentic and sustaining, trusting that when your light is rooted in who you truly are, it does not need to compete or be forced to be seen. You may have noticed that there is a growing comfort in letting your presence speak without commentary. You no longer feel the need to frame yourself or manage how you are received. When you are settled, what you bring arrives naturally, without effort, and others feel it, even if nothing is said. You often feel most relaxed when your energy is allowed to rise and fall without judgment. Some days you are expansive, expressive, ready to be seen. Other days you are quieter, content to observe. Neither version feels like a loss now. Both feel like you. You might recognize that you are learning to enjoy connection that does not center on you. Shared moments where attention moves freely. Conversations that wander. Laughter that belongs to everyone. These experiences nourish you because they remind you that belonging does not require performance. You are rarely interested anymore in environments that confuse volume with vitality. Loud appreciation without depth leaves you strangely untouched. What stays with you is sincerity, the kind that settles in slowly and remains steady over time. You may notice that you feel a deeper sense of pride when you honor your own limits, saying no when something would drain you, stepping back when your light needs rest. These choices feel dignified rather than defensive, and that dignity matters to you. You often experience joy when your creativity is met with playfulness rather than expectation, when expression feels like exploration again, when you can try something new without worrying about how it will be received. This freedom reconnects you to your natural confidence. You might recognize that you are becoming more patient with growth that happens behind the scenes. Not everything needs to be visible to be meaningful. Some of your most important shifts happen quietly, away from applause, and they still count. You are not turning away from recognition. You are simply learning that recognition has many forms. A moment of shared understanding, a quiet respect, a sense of ease in your own body. These forms sustain you longer than praise ever did. You may notice that you feel most alive when your warmth invites authenticity rather than imitation. When others feel encouraged to be themselves rather than to mirror you. This kind of influence feels collaborative rather than isolating. You are not dimming your light, you are letting it settle into something steadier, something that warms rather than dazzles, something that lasts. You continue, guided by creativity, pride, and a deepening trust in yourself, learning how to remain visible without strain, generous without depletion, and confident without needing constant confirmation. You may have noticed that the more you trust your own center, the less you feel the urge to control how others see you. You allow impressions to form without interference. You let people meet you where you are, rather than shaping yourself to meet them first. This ease feels unfamiliar at times, but it is also relieving. You often feel most confident when your presence is welcomed without conditions, not admired from afar, not leaned on too heavily, simply included. These moments confirm something important for you, that you do not have to shine constantly to belong. You might recognize that you are learning to separate your worth from your usefulness. Being helpful, encouraging, or inspiring has long been a way you connected. Now, you are noticing that connection can exist even when you are not offering anything in particular. This realization softens you. You are rarely interested in chasing relevance. What matters to you now is resonance. Does this space feel alive to you? Does it feel mutual? Does it allow you to show up honestly? These questions guide your choices more than attention ever could. You may notice that you feel calmer when you stop anticipating response. When you create, speak, or act without waiting to see how it lands. The act itself becomes enough. Response, if it comes, feels like a bonus rather than a requirement. You often experience fulfillment when your warmth is met with openness rather than expectation, when others respond with curiosity instead of consumption. This exchange keeps your generosity light and sustainable. You might recognize that you are becoming more comfortable letting moments pass without marking them. Not every success needs celebration. Not every contribution needs recognition. Some things can simply exist and still matter. You are not withdrawing from expression, you are refining it, choosing depth over display, meaning over momentum. This refinement gives your presence a steadiness that feels earned rather than asserted. You may notice that you feel most at peace when you allow yourself to be both strong and tender without explanation, when pride and vulnerability can coexist without needing to be resolved. This integration feels truer to you than any single role ever did. You often sense that your influence is strongest when it is subtle, when others feel encouraged without being directed, when warmth spreads naturally rather than being projected deliberately. This kind of impact feels aligned with who you are becoming. You are not afraid of being seen. You are learning to trust that being real is more compelling than being impressive. That authenticity carries its own gravity. You continue, guided by creativity, dignity, and a growing inner steadiness, allowing your light to move at its own rhythm, trusting that when it is rooted in self-respect and ease, it does not need to announce itself to be felt. You may have noticed that your sense of belonging no longer depends on how brightly you show up. You feel it now in quieter signals, ease in conversation, a sense of being welcomed without needing to bring anything extra. These moments settle you more deeply than applause ever did. You often feel most aligned when your presence feels optional rather than required. When you are there because you choose to be, not because the space depends on you. This freedom changes how your warmth lands. It becomes softer, more genuine, less strained. You might recognize that you are learning to enjoy your own company in ways you once avoided. Silence no longer feels like absence. It feels like space. Time without an audience becomes restorative, rather than empty. This shift gives your confidence somewhere private to rest. You are rarely interested now in environments that thrive on constant output. Being busy does not impress you. Being alive does. You want experiences that feel meaningful rather than merely visible. Depth has started to matter more than reach. You may notice that you feel a deeper respect for yourself when you honor your own rhythms, when you rest before you are depleted, when you speak because you want to, not because you feel expected to. These choices strengthen your sense of dignity. You often experience creativity as something that needs protection as much as expression. Too much exposure too quickly can drain it. Allowing ideas to grow quietly before sharing them helps your work feel truer to you. You might recognize that you are becoming more selective about praise. Compliments that are generic no longer move you. What matters now is being understood, being met where you actually are rather than where others imagine you to be. You are not abandoning ambition, you are redefining it. Success for you now includes sustainability, joy, and the ability to stay connected to yourself along the way. Achievement without alignment feels hollow. You may notice that you feel most powerful when your presence invites authenticity in others, when people relax around you instead of performing. This influence feels natural, not forced, and it satisfies something deeper than recognition ever could. You often sense that your light is most effective when it is steady rather than constant. Allowing it to ebb gives it depth. Allowing it to rest gives it longevity. This understanding is new, but it feels right. You are not fading. You are consolidating, gathering your warmth into something more durable, something that can last without constant effort. You continue, guided by creativity, pride, and a deepening trust in yourself, learning how to let your presence be felt without strain, trusting that when your light is grounded and real, it naturally finds its way into the spaces where it belongs. You may have noticed that there is a growing confidence in letting things unfold without steering them. You no longer feel the same impulse to guide every interaction or shape every outcome. Trusting the moment has become easier, and with that trust comes a softer kind of authority. You often feel most content when your warmth is met with steadiness rather than excitement, when people stay present without needing you to lift them, when connection feels calm instead of charged. These moments may feel understated, but they nourish you deeply. You might recognize that you are becoming more aware of how much energy you once spent maintaining an image, not out of vanity, but out of care. You wanted things to go well. You wanted people to feel good. Letting go of that responsibility frees you in ways you did not anticipate. You are rarely interested now in being the center of everything. You enjoy being part of something larger, something shared. When attention moves naturally, rather than being directed at you, you feel more relaxed, more included, more yourself. You may notice that you feel most grounded when your generosity is chosen rather than automatic. Giving because it feels right rather than because it is expected keeps your heart open. When generosity is assumed, you step back without drama, conserving what matters. You often experience pride as something internal rather than displayed, knowing you acted with integrity, knowing you stayed true to yourself. This pride does not need witnesses. It settles quietly and stays. You might recognize that you are learning to let joy be simple, laughter without performance, creativity without pressure, presence without purpose. These moments remind you that expression does not always need an audience to be real. You are not someone who has lost interest in recognition. You have simply refined what recognition means. Being seen clearly matters more than being seen often. Being understood matters more than being admired. You may notice that you feel more at ease allowing others to take the lead sometimes. Not because you doubt yourself, but because you trust the shared space to hold without you carrying it. This trust lightens you. You often feel most alive when your warmth invites others to soften rather than impress. When people feel safe to be ordinary around you, this influence feels truer than commanding attention ever did. You are not dimming your light. You are letting it mature, turning brightness into warmth, visibility into presence, confidence into steadiness. You continue, guided by creativity, dignity, and a quieter self-assurance, learning how to remain open without effort, trusting that your light, when allowed to be natural, is felt more deeply than when it is forced to shine. You may have noticed that when you stop trying to carry a room, you begin to feel the room carry you instead. Support shows up in quieter ways. Someone else takes initiative. Someone else holds space. You realize that connection does not collapse when you step back, and that discovery settles something inside you. You often feel most balanced when your presence is welcomed, but not relied upon. When people enjoy you without needing you to perform a role. This balance allows your warmth to remain generous rather than strategic. You might recognize that you are becoming more honest with yourself about when something no longer feels joyful. You no longer push enthusiasm just to maintain an image. When joy fades, you let it rest, trusting it will return when it is ready. You are rarely interested now in maintaining momentum for its own sake. Movement that feels empty no longer satisfies you. What matters is whether what you are doing feels alive, meaningful, and connected to who you are becoming. You may notice that you feel a deeper sense of dignity when you allow yourself to be human in public. Not polished, not impressive, just real. This authenticity creates a different kind of respect, one that does not fluctuate with attention. You often experience confidence as something that deepens through rest rather than effort. When you give yourself space to recharge, your light returns without being forced. This teaches you that your brilliance is not fragile, it renews itself naturally. You might recognize that you are learning to enjoy appreciation without clinging to it. Compliments can land and pass without defining you. You take in what feels sincere and let the rest move on. You are not someone who needs to dominate to feel secure. You are discovering that your presence has weight, even when you are quiet. This realization changes how you relate to power and visibility. You may notice that you feel most fulfilled when your warmth supports others without eclipsing them, when the space you create allows everyone to shine in their own way. This shared light feels richer than standing alone. You are not stepping away from expression. You are refining it, allowing it to be responsive, spacious, and grounded. This refinement gives your creativity room to breathe and your confidence room to last. You continue, guided by a maturing sense of self, trusting that your light does not need constant attention to remain real, and that when it is offered with ease rather than effort, it becomes something others feel safe to step toward rather than admire from a distance. You may have noticed that as things grow quieter, your sense of self feels less fragile. You do not need the same amount of reinforcement to stay steady. Being present without being prominent begins to feel comfortable, even relieving. You often feel most settled when your actions are guided by choice rather than response. When you step forward because it feels right, not because something is pulling at you, this freedom changes the quality of your presence. It becomes softer, more grounded, less urgent. You might recognize that you enjoy moments where nothing is being asked of you. No encouragement needed, no performance expected, just space to exist as you are. These moments recharge you in ways applause never could. You are rarely interested now in filling silence for its own sake. Silence has become a place you can rest rather than a gap you need to close. When you allow it, you notice how your confidence settles inward, unbothered by whether it is being noticed. You may notice that you feel a deeper sense of pride when you honor your own limits. Saying no without explanation, pausing without guilt, choosing rest before exhaustion. These choices feel dignified, even if no one else sees them. You often experience connection most clearly when it is simple. Shared presence, mutual ease, moments that do not need commentary. These are the spaces where you feel genuinely known, not for what you bring, but for who you are when nothing is required. You might recognize that you are less tempted to chase momentum. Activity for the sake of staying visible no longer satisfies you. What matters now is whether something feels alive and true, even if it moves slowly. You are not withdrawing from the world. You are choosing how you meet it. This choice gives your warmth more depth and your expression more intention. When you do engage, it carries a steadiness others can feel. You may notice that your confidence now shows up as ease rather than intensity. You take up space without needing to defend it. You contribute without measuring the response. This ease feels earned, not assumed. You often feel most yourself when your creativity is allowed to unfold quietly. Ideas forming without pressure. Expression emerging without expectation. These moments reconnect you to the joy of creating before it was ever observed. You might recognize that you are becoming more comfortable letting recognition arrive later, or not at all. Knowing you acted in alignment with yourself has become enough. External response no longer determines whether something mattered. You are not dimming your light. You are allowing it to breathe, letting it rise when invited and rest when it needs to. This rhythm keeps your warmth sustainable. You may notice that you feel a gentle confidence in knowing you do not need to be everywhere. Your presence has weight, even when it is rare. Choosing when to appear makes your return more meaningful. You often experience fulfillment when your warmth supports others without overshadowing them. When your presence creates space rather than filling it. This influence feels collaborative, not performative. You might recognize that you are learning to trust your own timing. You no longer rush yourself to show up fully before you are ready. When you arrive whole. You are not concerned now with being impressive. You are concerned with being real. That concern shapes your choices quietly, consistently, and with care. You continue, guided by warmth, creativity, and a settled sense of dignity, allowing your light to move naturally between expression and rest, trusting that when it is offered with ease rather than effort, it becomes something lasting. Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. I hope you have enjoyed spending time moving through the world of Leo.